someone left a comment on one of my videos that said, all serial killers are sexually motivated. And my immediate reaction was, no, they're not. But then I tried to name one that wasn't. Dahmer, sexual. Bundy, same. Gacy, yup. Ramirez, BTK, Kemper, yup. Well, suddenly I had a problem because I still thought the comment was wrong. I just couldn't immediately prove it. So today, I want to figure it out properly. Are all serial killers sexually motivated? And just as importantly, what does sexually motivated actually mean? Welcome to Breakfast Cereal. My name's Josh. I want you to try and think of a serial killer right now that wasn't sexually motivated. It might be hard to do. So drop the name in the comments and then come back at the end of this video and edit your comment. Do you still think that way? Or did the video change your mind? You see, this episode started with that one comment, but the more I looked into it, the more I realized it gets to the center of how we picture serial killers. Because when most people hear serial killer, they picture the big guys, the guys that I just mentioned. Bundy, Dahmer, Gacy, Ramirez, BTK, Kemper. And when your mental image of an entire category is built from 6 sexually motivated men, it becomes very easy to assume the sexual motive is what makes someone a serial killer. So, let's start with the most boring possible place. The definition. What is a serial killer? Well, believe it or not, this question itself is a hot topic. Now, the definition many of us grew up hearing was 3 or more murders committed over time with a cooling off period in between. And yes, there is a federal law that uses a 3 killing threshold. But I mean, even the FBI says that particular definition has a limited purpose. It was created to establish when the FBI could step in and assist local law enforcement. It was not intended to be the universal definition of a serial killer. So then in 2005, the FBI gathered 135 investigators, academics, psychologists, prosecutors, and other experts for a serial murder symposium. Yeah, you heard me right, a serial murder symposium. What is it, like the fucking Fellowship of the Ring? Anyway, after debating the victim count, the cooling off period, and whether motive should be included, they settled on a broader definition: the unlawful killing of 2 or more victims by the same offender or offenders in separate events. Nothing in that definition says the murders have to involve sexual assault, sexual fantasy, or sexual gratification. In fact, the experts specifically discussed whether motivation belonged in the definition and decided that it did not. Here, I've got a copy of the official FBI report. You can download this PDF too if you want a closer look. I'll link it in the description, okay? Okay, so right here, section 2.4, myth. Serial killers are only motivated by sex. All serial murders are not sexually based. There are many other motivations for serial murders, including anger, thrill, financial gain, and attention seeking. Okay, so right away, the official answer appears to be no. Sexual motivation is not what technically makes someone a serial killer. But that still leaves us with a much more, if you ask me, interesting question. Even if sexual motivation is not required by the definition, how often is it actually present? So I found yet another FBI research monograph called Serial Murder Pathways for Investigations. It notes right here, right away in the introduction on page 4, that the majority of serial murder cases involve offenders who kill for sexual reasons. But that is a very, very different statement from saying all of them do. A majority can be overwhelming and still leave thousands of exceptions. And that distinction is basically this entire episode. Next, we need to define what we're actually looking for. What does sexually motivated mean? Sounds simple until you really start pulling it apart. The clearest version would be a killer who sexually assaults a victim during the crime. Bundy would fit. Gacy would fit. Dahmer would fit. But sexual motivation can exist without a conventional sexual assault. A person may become aroused by stalking someone, frightening them, restraining them, controlling them, or killing them. The excitement may be attached to the entire ritual rather than to one recognizable sexual act. Okay, so back to this report again. On page 56, this is the section on serial sexual murders. Investigators found documented evidence of sexual contact in only 49.5% of the cases. Okay, so wait, let me get this straight. Less than half of victims of serial sexual murder show evidence of sexual contact. Okay, got it. But that does not mean contact definitely did not occur in the other half, but it does show that an absence of obvious sexual activity does not automatically make murder non-sexual. So when someone says he didn't sexually assault anyone, that does not necessarily settle the question. The Zodiac Killer. Whenever this subject comes up, one of the first names people mention in the comment section is Zodiac. But there's an immediate problem with using Zodiac to prove anything. We don't know who he was. If we don't know who the offender was, then we don't have his personal history, private fantasies, journals, relationships, or interviews. We do have the crimes and communications, so let's look at those. The 4 canonical Zodiac attacks were different from the classic sexually sadistic serial murder pattern. He attacked 3 young couples and 1 taxi driver. He used guns in 3 attacks and a knife in 1. He did not remain at the scenes for prolonged sexual contact, and no conventional sexual assault was documented. He also sent letters and ciphers, demanded publication, taunted the police, and deliberately constructed the character of Zodiac. The FBI describes 5 confirmed murders and a campaign of cryptic communications that terrorized Northern California. That could be thrill, it could be power, it could be a desperate need for attention. And yeah, it could contain a sexualized component that was never visible at the scene. But can we confidently call it sexual? No. Can we confidently call it non-sexual? Also no. Zodiac is not a counterexample. He's a question mark. Unsolved killers should not become just blank screens onto which we project whichever motive helps our argument. Now, Son of Sam is a much more interesting case if you ask me. David Berkowitz did not sexually assault his victims. In many of the attacks, he approached couples in parked cars, fired through a window, and just ran away. Now, at first glance, this looks like a clean, non-sexual example, right? But the victim pattern matters. He repeatedly targeted young women and courting couples. He attacked people while they were kissing, dating, or sitting together in cars. He was an isolated, resentful man, attacking symbols of intimacy that he believed he'd been denied. I mean, that's why I sometimes talk about him as the original incel. Forensic psychologist Louis Schlesinger has described Berkowitz as becoming excited by shooting courting couples and later using imagery associated with the attacks, like newspapers, etc., as his own material, so to speak. Berkowitz did not even need to touch the victims for the crime to function as a sexual experience for him. Then we get to the so-called chessboard killer. Initially, I thought, there, found one. Pichushkin murdered people around Bitsa Park in Moscow. Many of his victims were older men, homeless people, or people struggling with alcoholism. He often drank with them, attacked them, and disposed of them in sewer wells. This doesn't look like Bundy or Gacy. Doesn't immediately look sexual at all. Pichushkin himself talked about the killing as if it just elevated him above other people. Guy appeared obsessed with the number of victims. He was chasing Chikatilo's record, he said. So maybe this was just pure power. Except, there's another detail. According to an extensive profile of Pichushkin, he reportedly told investigators that he sometimes, while killing. Well, there goes that one. But hold on, that was just a singular article from GQ magazine. And I tried and I couldn't find any other source to back up that claim. So I'm not ready to definitively say either way with Pichushkin. Harold Shipman. Shipman murdered patients under the cover of being their family doctor. He was convicted of murdering 15 people, and the official inquiry concluded that he had killed at least 215 patients. Most were older women. He often administered a lethal dose of diamorphine, altered medical records, and certified the deaths himself. He also forged the will of his final known victim, Kathleen Grundy, making himself the sole beneficiary of her estate. So, there. Proof he was financially motivated, right? That's what people always say about Shipman. Well, not really. You could point to it for one, that final murder, sure. But what about the hundreds of deaths stretching across decades before that one? Regardless, his broader motive remains unknown. Control is one possibility. A god complex is another. Some researchers have proposed that he enjoyed the moment of pronouncing a healthy person dead after secretly causing the death himself. There is no established public evidence connecting Shipman's murders to arousal or fantasy. Could that evidence have existed privately? Of course. Could he have experienced some sexualized thrill that no one discovered? Yeah, maybe. But maybe doesn't prove that all serial killers are sexually motivated. If we're just allowed to invent an invisible sexual motive whenever the known evidence points somewhere else, then we're not testing the claim anymore. So, Shipman is a much better counterexample than Zodiac or Berkowitz or even Pichushkin because, well, A, we know who he was, and B, we know a great deal about his crimes and we still do not have solid evidence of sexual motivation. The DC Snipers. The DC Snipers create another category problem. John Allen Muhammad and Lee Boyd Malvo killed 10 people and wounded 3 others around the Washington metropolitan area during a series of separate attacks in October 2002. They were also connected to earlier shootings in other states. They appeared to be random serial shooters, but that randomness may have been strategic. One widely discussed theory was that Muhammad intended to eventually murder his ex-wife and disguise her death as just one more random sniper victim. Diabolical. Now, Malvo, on the other hand, later testified about a much larger plan involving terror, extortion, and the creation of a training operation funded with money extracted from the government. Now, the exact hierarchy of motives remains disputed. But either way, what does not appear in the known evidence is sexual gratification. And again, we could speculate, right? We could say Muhammad's coercive control over his ex-wife was psychologically connected to sexuality because they had been married. But that would turn sexual motivation just into a word game. Domestic control is not automatically sexual motivation. The DC Sniper case is another reminder that serial murder can be a method used in service of a completely different objective. Then we get to Richard Chase and Herbert Mullen. Chase believed his blood was deteriorating and that he needed to consume the blood of other people to survive. Mullen believed human sacrifices were preventing California earthquakes. He killed 13 people and claimed the deaths were necessary to save countless others. So it's tempting to remove people like this from the discussion. I mean, you might say, okay, come on, Josh, that's insanity. It's different. Yeah, you're right. It is different. But they are still serial killers. We cannot create a theory that all serial killers are sexually motivated and then exclude every serial killer whose motive contradicts the theory, right? I mean, psychosis is not technically a motive in the same way that money or revenge is. It's a mental state that can produce delusional beliefs, commands, and distorted interpretations of reality. But within those distorted realities, Chase and Mullen definitely had reasons for what they were doing. Chase believed he needed blood. Mullen believed he was preventing earthquakes. Neither case requires a sexual explanation. In fact, the Radford FGCU report here in section 12, it lists psychosis as the primary category in only about half of 1% of known serial killer cases. Or, according to this table, 21 out of 3,440 cases at the time of publication. Now that makes it rare, very rare, but rare is not zero, is it? But hold on a sec. What about women? This is where the theory really starts falling apart. Because everything we've discussed so far has been overwhelmingly male. And that makes sense. Men make up the large majority of known serial killers, particularly during the period some people refer to as the Golden Age. But women who do kill repeatedly tend to have very different motives. The same database report we were just looking at, it compares the primary motives recorded for male and female serial killers. And the difference is enormous. I'm going to let this sit here for a minute so you can take it in. And keep in mind that even the report itself warns that motive can be difficult to determine and that these numbers may be better understood as broad categories. Still though, the gender contrast is hard to ignore. Financial gain was recorded as the primary motive for nearly 70% of the female killers. Compare that with only 28% of the male killers. And this category was recorded for 27.7% of the men and only 3.7% of the women. Now, that doesn't mean that female serial killers are like harmless accountants who occasionally get carried away. It means their violence often operates differently. I have an entire episode on female serial killers linked above and in the description. In it, I talked about how many female offenders kill people already inside their circle. Husbands, children, patients, boarding house tenants, elderly relatives. Their crimes frequently involve financial gain, convenience, revenge, attention, or distorted caregiving rather than a prolonged sexual fantasy involving the hunt for strangers. In this peer-reviewed study called Female Serial Killers in the United States, Means, Motives, and Makings, which was published in the Journal of Forensic Psychiatry and Psychology, they found that of the 64 known American female serial killers, financial gain was the most common motive, poisoning was the most common method, and most of the women knew all or most of the victims. You got women like Dorothea Puente, who killed vulnerable tenants and continued collecting their benefit payments. You got Nannie Doss, who poisoned husbands and relatives and sometimes collected insurance money. Could control or excitement also be present? Yeah, absolutely. But once again, control and excitement do not automatically equal sexual motivation. Then we have her. Wuornos is probably the only female serial killer many people can immediately name, partly because she doesn't fit the traditional female pattern. She killed strangers. She used a gun. Her victims were men she encountered while working as a sex worker. Oh, wait, there we go, sex worker. Boom. Sexual murders, right? Case closed. But hang on. The sexual context of a crime is not the same as a sexual motive. Whether it was self-defense or Aileen was just robbing and killing, end of the day, it doesn't really matter for what we're talking about here. There's sex surrounding the case. It brought her in contact with the victims. But that doesn't mean that the murders gave her gratification in that way. Her possible motives include robbery, rage, fear, revenge, survival, and a desire to avoid identification. It'd be strange to insist that she must have been sexually motivated simply because it was part of the circumstances. That'd be like assuming someone who kills a coworker at the office must have been motivated by their career. The circumstances surrounding a murder are not automatically the motive behind it. Context and motive are not the same thing. So where does that leave us? Are all serial killers sexually motivated? No. But I understand why the idea feels true. Many of the most famous serial killers were sexually motivated. The killers who shaped the public image of serial murder were often men who hunted strangers, developed violent fantasies, and fused sex with domination, suffering, and death. And then we took one particularly frightening subtype of serial killer and turned it into the definition of the entire phenomenon. So the person who left this comment was wrong. But they were wrong in a much more interesting way than I initially thought. Because not all serial killers are sexually motivated. It just happens that most of the serial killers we remember were.